this morning for somebody with experience of political crises, somebody who's seen, remarkable events in Parliament, and you've sat there through some amazing days. But when you look back at the week that's just happened, is there anything that can really compare with it?
Nothing in my political career compares with what happened last week or in the last few weeks. I suppose possibly you'd go to the Second World War, you'd go to some of those extraordinary debates that led to the resignation of Neville Chamberlain and the rise of Winston Churchill. Perhaps you'd have to go back to that for similar levels of drama. These days I'm much more of a historian than I am an active politician. I'm not in any way an active politician. And I have found these weeks deeply interesting historically. So I think the comparisons would be with World War II and with that period before World War I, where the Liberal government was trying to get through Irish Home Rule and reforming the House of Lords and so on. So this is the sort of chaos that only occurs once every, let's say, half century or something like that. I think even more to the point is whether this sets precedents. I mean, is it to be the case now that you can have a three-line whip, that members of the cabinet will disobey the three-line whip and remain members of the government? Is it to be the case in future that the chief whip asks a cabinet minister to resign and the cabinet minister refuses? Is it to be the case in future that a Secretary of State, speaking on behalf of the government, can commend a motion to the House, which means I want you all to vote for it, and then go and vote against it? I mean, this makes absolute nonsense of Parliament.
That was the champagne moment of the week for me. That was Stephen Barclay urging the House to vote for the government motion and then going to vote against it. I mean, quite
when
extraordinary.
You say champagne, I mean, you are famously a patriot, and therefore I'm not sure that we should be drinking champagne. I mean, Parliament is meant to mean something. The House of Commons is meant to mean something. If a minister says to the House of Commons, I commend this motion to the House, and then goes into the other lobby to vote against it, surely this is quite a serious development in our parliamentary democracy. I mean, we know that levels of cynicism and scepticism about our processes have been rising during this whole business. But really, for a person barefacedly to say to the House, I want you to vote for this, and then go and vote against it, I mean, public trust is in tatters.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, the one thing that I feel potentially excited about is I think that BrExit has proved itself to be bigger than the two political parties. And I'm beginning to think, and I know we have the first past the post system, but I'm beginning to think that maybe we're about to see a fragmentation of British politics, an end to the dominance of a two-party system. And I, in some ways, I find that quite an exciting prospect.
Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, you probably thought that a while ago when you got 4 million votes, but as you say, under the first past the post system, that didn't make any difference. And extraordinarily, at the last general election, the two main parties took over 80% of the votes between them. And this reversed the situation during the previous decades, where the vote from the two main parties had been disintegrating and moving to the SNP and the Liberal Democrats and so on, and of course to UKIP, excuse me. And that process was reversed in the 2017 election. So we'll see what's going to happen. By the way, I don't think many members of the public would celebrate if they believe that the future of British politics to be shaped around Brexit. I would think by now that most people would like this business to come to an end. And it is meant to come to an end on March the 29th. And I know that you've been lobbying governments, well, I'm informed that you've been lobbying governments to see if they will veto giving Britain an extension to Article 50. I rather think that would be to do Britain a favour, that we could resolve this matter within the next 10 days, rather than the prospect of it going on for another 2 or another 4 years. So, if we were not allowed to postpone Article 50, the only choices we would have would be Mrs May's deal, no deal, or no Brexit. And all of that would have to be resolved in the next 10 days. And if the answer was no Brexit, which I think probably it would be, given the House of Commons that we have, then all the members of Parliament who voted to revoke Article 50 to bring the Brexit process to an end in defiance of the referendum of 2016, all of those names would be on the page and all of those people would be identified. And that would be a return to democratic accountability.
Well, it certainly would be. I mean, what would you do, Michael Portillo? If you were there, still in the House of Commons, facing these choices this week, what would you do?
I'm going to expose myself to ridicule here by saying that last week I probably would have voted for Mrs May's deal because I could see that the alternative is almost certainly, I think, no Brexit. The Remainers are very, very strong in Parliament. No Brexit has been the plan all the way along, and I think they're within a hair's breadth of producing no Brexit. So I would have voted for the deal last week. This morning I've been reading the press, and I've been very persuaded by one of your fellow MEPs, Daniel Hannan, who I think is a very clever man. And he's really saying that the deal is so bad, and that, you know, if we get into an extension of Brexit, that there might be a chance to do something better. So, you know, I might be persuadable the other way around this week. What I want to say to you is that I don't think we should be calling those Brexiteers who are conflicted over this traitors or anything like that for whatever decision they make. I mean, these are people who have sacrificed their careers. I mean, if you're talking about the Bernard Jenkins and the Bill Cashes, these are people who could have held ministerial office but have been prevented from holding ministerial office because of their views on the European Union. Or we're talking about people like Esther McVey, who, you know, had a promising cabinet career but gave it up on the matter of Brexit. So these people are not traitors. They are people who are genuinely conflicted with the very clear prospect that if Mrs May's deal does not get through, then Brexit, one way or another, will run into the sand.
I'll tell you what we'll do, Michael.
Yes.
Pop the headphones on. Let's listen. Let's listen to Esther McVey and her justification for her change of position.
Yes, because the rules have all changed. Before last week, there was the choice of this deal or no deal, and we'd all stood on a manifesto, and I believed that no deal was better than a bad deal, and I still believe Theresa May's deal is a bad deal. But after the votes in the House last week, that isn't the option facing us anymore. No deal has been removed. The Article 50 will be extended. The date has removed. So the choice before us is this deal or no Brexit whatsoever. And to not have Brexit, you go against the democratic vote of the people. So government and Parliament have connived to fundamentally undermine Brexit.
Has government connived? Has Theresa May connived to undermine Brexit?
What she said was government. Rather than Theresa May.
Well, I think it was implied.
I think quite a lot of government has connived, yes. I think civil servants and various members of the cabinet probably have connived at precisely where we are today. That was very well argued, typically well argued by Esther McVey. Of course, there will be others who will point out that the votes that were made in Parliament last week ruling out a no deal did not actually rule out a no deal because they did not have legislative force. There would have to be an Act of Parliament passed to reverse the present Act of Parliament that says that the United Kingdom leaves on March the 29th. And we're some distance away from that. So there will be others who say, no, Esther McVey has got this wrong. Until Parliament votes to change the existing legislation, we will be leaving on March the 29th. So some of the people who will vote this week, if they get the chance, against Mrs May's deal, that'll be on the basis that they think that no deal will come about rather than
I think Peter Bone thinks that may well happen, and he's going to come on the show at 11 o'clock today. The one thing that I'm mystified by with this, you know, back in the 70s, we were told it was a common market, and that was a phrase that sounded quite fluffy and quite nice, but it wasn't. It was a European Economic Community that then became a European Community and then became a European Union. And we're talking all the time about Mrs May's deal or the withdrawal agreement. I met Mr Barnier at 9 o'clock last Tuesday morning, and he strode into the room carrying the document under his arm, and then sat down and spoke to half a dozen of us, and he held it up. He said, the treaty, the language that is used in Brussels, it's not a deal, it's a treaty. It's an internationally binding treaty. And I have to say, I'm completely with many of the arguments Daniel Hannan makes today. I think if we do go for Mrs May's deal, far from solving the question of our relationship with the European Union, I think it'll begin a new chapter of just terrible division for all of us.
Well, to summarise Daniel Hannan's argument in one line, I suppose he's saying that from this deal, this treaty, there is no unilateral exit, whereas from the European Union itself, there is a unilateral exit under Article 50. Of course, many people would now scoff at that argument by saying, well, we've just tested to what extent we have a unilateral exit from the European Union, and look where it's got us. In other words, the supposed possibility of unilateral exit from the European Union has not proved very successful.
Looking, Michael Portillo, at when we've heard Esther McVey has decided she'll hold her nose and back the deal because she thinks no deal's off the table. Some will disagree with that. What do you think's going to happen if they put this to the final vote?
I think that if she puts it to the final vote again this week, she'll lose by rather less than she lost last week, and much less than she lost the week before. But I still think that she will lose. The position of the DUP, obviously, in this is extremely important. And there are people now saying that they're 50-50, some combination of assurances and money.
Money.
The DUP is very important. It's not just the votes that the DUP have, it's also that quite a lot of Conservative MPs feel bound to show solidarity with the DUP. So if the DUP came across, that would bring many more votes than just the DUP votes, a substantial number of Conservative votes. For instance, I'm pretty sure Jacob Rees-Mogg would be voting for the deal if the DUP were on board. That's still a very big if. I'm not at all sure the DUP can be brought across. But even if they are, and even if quite a lot of the European Research Group follow the DUP, there are obviously some who are not going to come across. There are some who think that this deal is so hideous that all the alternatives are less bad than this deal. And I think that is a sufficient number. I suppose there's just one other consideration we should bear in mind. Would there be some Labour switchers at that point, some people who might come across and think, oh, well, look, we can finish this thing. I don't feel any particular loyalty to Jeremy Corbyn. I'll switch across and vote for Mrs May's deal.
So Caroline Flint, people like that, perhaps.
And but maybe it gets quite hard to name them after that. So my assessment would be too few to make the difference. The deal might go down by, a relatively small number of 10s, 10, 20, 30. But, of course, in the House of Commons, one vote is sufficient.
Yeah, and so does she then... She then goes to Brussels, of course. Let's assume the vote's on Wednesday. Within 24 hours, she's going to be meeting the other heads of state, the other leaders in Brussels. Could she bring it back for a final vote in the days running up to March the 29th? Again, and what threats? Could she up the threat level? Today it's either this or maybe no Brexit at all. Are there any other potential threats she could use?
There are certainly other threats they could use. The French could say that they want fishing now to be part of this, that we need to make concessions on access to our fishing grounds. The Spanish could say that, of course, the question of Gibraltar now needs to be brought into play as part of conceding the extension. And Mrs May might think that these terrible threats suited her in a way, because she could come back and say, not only this is an extension of 2 years, but it's also Gibraltar and fishing now brought into play. So now you really do have to vote for my deal.
Treaty. Let's call it a treaty.
Yes. No, I think you're right to do that. You really do have to vote for this treaty. People would be so cross with her by then. It's just the whole thing is unimaginable. But if you're asking, can the thing get worse? Definitely, it can get worse.
Now, there is one scenario that says that there are some of these ERG types that might vote for this package, this treaty, if they're promised Mrs May resigns as Prime Minister. Does that work politically?
I doubt it. I think it is terribly important that Mrs May should go soon, because we're clearly reaching the end of a phase. I hope it might be that the whole thing is settled by March the 29th, one way or the other, but we're certainly reaching the end of a phase, and for the next phase we need a new Prime Minister. But I think the people who are worried about the issues know that Mrs May is not really one of the issues. If she's to be succeeded by Jeremy Hunt, by Philip Hammond, perhaps quite unlikely, but it'll be business as usual for many of these people. So, although I think it's important that she be replaced, I don't think it can help to win her deal. Indeed, I'm not sure that any other potential leader of the Conservative Party would support the deal.
Well, it's a party that, you back in the times of Thatcher saw a party that had different wings, and political parties always have splits and different wings. Maastricht was a huge split within the party. But isn't this one in a way almost fatal for the Conservatives?
I simply don't know, because I cannot see the future. The issue has always been the same. The issue has always been Europe. Europe has been a curse for the Conservative Party. I remember John Major telling me before he was Prime Minister, and at a time when I was young enough to be puzzled by the remark, this would be about 1988, he said, Europe is a wolf coming up the path to gobble up the Conservative Party. And so it has proved to be. I mean, one Conservative leader after another has fallen on the issue of Europe, or at least partly on the issue of Europe. And it is the terrible, terrible split within the Conservative Party. You might therefore think it would be quite irrational for a Conservative Prime Minister to call a referendum on the issue.
Well, I don't think he had much choice. There was a,
well, that's your viewpoint. But anyway,
there was another wolf coming up the path at that moment in time. And
yes, the Farage wolf.
Yes.
So it's always been the same thing. I mean, you see, the Conservative Party is kind of quite coherent. Apart from the question of Europe.
That's quite a statement this morning.
I know that's a bit like... No, I was going to make a bad taste remark. I won't make the bad taste remark. I realise that, of course, the European thing is absolutely fundamental within the Conservative Party, and saying that it's united apart from that, it may seem a little bit trite. But, I mean, that was David Cameron's ambition, clearly. He wanted to put the European issue aside so that the Conservatives could concentrate on what united them. So, for instance, if we got through this week and we either left the European Union or we remained in the European Union, maybe the Conservative Party could again talk about something else.
Now, who's to say what will happen electorally, but it's possible, of course, that the next Prime Minister of this country is one Jeremy Corbyn.